This is Isaac Moore, and today is February 10th, 2015. I'm here with, oh my gosh, sorry, I forgot your name. A little nervous. Okay, I'll restart. This is Isaac Moore, and today is February 10th, 2015. I'm here with Paul Azaroff in Boca Raton, Florida, and we are going to record an oral history interview as part of the Yiddish Book Center's Wexler Oral History Project. Paul, do I have your permission to record?
You certainly do.
Thank you. So I'd like to start out by talking about your family background.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me briefly what you know about your family background?
Oh, sure, yeah. My immediate family, my mother came from a city called Białystok, which is in the northeast part of Poland. And she came to America in 1929 with her sister and her mother to join a third sister who had been here since before World War I. She left behind her father, two brothers, married, children. They all died in the Holocaust. They didn't want to come to America, and even though they were urged to come here, they didn't want to come. My father was born in New York City, but his parents, he was born in 1908, and his parents came to America in 1905 from a city in Belarus called Gomel or Homle, and they lived in the Lower East Side. And my father was working for a man named Paul Bernstein, and Paul came to work one day and said, I've got two sisters-in-law just arrived from Europe. If you marry one of them, I'll make you a partner in the business. So he went to the house, he met the two sisters and chose my mother and married her. He spoke a little bit of Yiddish. She spoke only Yiddish, Polish, Esperanto, but not English. Then 6 months later or 5 months later, the Depression happened. My father had no work. They were out on the street, and my mother was pregnant. And so that was the beginning of my family. 4 years later, I came along.
Do you have any stories about your grandparents?
Yes. Well, my grandmother came to America, and she spoke only Yiddish, wouldn't learn English, didn't have to learn English, because New York was such a Jewish city. She did very, very well speaking Yiddish, and she was my best pal. I loved her, and she loved me, and I hung out with her, and I only spoke Yiddish to her. My mother didn't learn English for many years either, so she spoke Yiddish, and my father spoke Yiddish to her. So Yiddish was the language of the house, and when I started going to school, they wanted me to go to yeshiva. And I went for 3 days, and I wouldn't go to yeshiva. So I went to English school, public school. But after school, I went to cheder for Hebrew, and then Sundays I went to Yiddish school.
So, great. I'd like to talk about the house you grew up in. Can you describe the physical space of your home?
Well, we moved. My mother found that in those days, if you moved to a new apartment, they gave you a paint job and a month's free rent. So we must have moved 10 times before I was 5 years old, it seems to me. We lived in a lot of, but always within a block or two of this, always in the same area, but we moved a lot. And we rented. My father chased pigeons. Do you know what that is, pigeon chasing? It's very common among Jews and Italians and Arabs also. We had a roof on whatever apartment we rented. My father made sure we had a flat roof. He'd put coops up there. He had hundreds of pigeons. And in the morning, when he was off, he'd take a great big bamboo pole with a red rag and chase the pigeons, and they fly around in beautiful circles all around, ever widening. As soon as a neighbor who had pigeons saw my father's flock was out, he sent his pigeons out, hoping the two flocks would intertwine, and when they came back to roost, he'd have some of my father's better pigeons. Then the dealing would start. I want my pigeon back, what will you give me? And if they couldn't settle, you could send a kid up to steal your pigeon back. And then it got kind of dangerous. And so we always had pigeons, and my father was a pigeon treiber. We called him a pigeon chaser. And so we always had roofs. Wherever we went, my father looked at the roof, not the apartment. It didn't matter about that. And my mother used to report him because the pigeons brought rats, you see. And so my father said, I don't know who the hell, snitched on me. And mother always we knew, my mother knew. But she was always reporting him to the health department for the rat, because his pigeons were bringing rats into the backyard.
So to get back to the home,
yes.
What about your house felt Jewish growing up?
Oh, well, we spoke Yiddish. We were Orthodox, we kosher. I couldn't use a pair of scissors on Shabbos. I couldn't turn the radio on Shabbos. It was, we ate only Jewish food. I remember once going to the movies, and I won a bag of groceries, and it was things like a peanut butter and popcorn and all kinds of American stuff, macaroni and cheese. My mother couldn't read the label. She got really mad at me for bringing such food into the house, and so we didn't even know American food. To this day, I can't eat peanut butter. It's somehow a very strange, exotic food that I don't want to even taste. But it was a very Jewish house, and Yom Kippur, my mother would always had a special, I still have it, a tablecloth that would go on the table with a siddur, prayer book, and the Yortzeit, the candles you light for the memory of the dead, and that would be a sign that we don't eat that day. It was a very Jewish home. And also the conversation was very Jewish. My mother had endless stories. I thought she was making them up, and I was a lousy eater. And whenever she would get me to eat, she would tell me a story. I don't think she ever repeated a story twice. And I thought she was making up stories. And she told me about black Jews in Ethiopia called falashes and all kinds of things like that. And later on, when I went to university and I was studying it, I realized these are all true things. Maybe a little bit garbled, but she knew a lot. So I grew up in a very Jewish household. Very Jewish.
And who were the people in your house growing up?
Well, my sister was 4 years older than me. Her name is Libby. And my father, my mother. My grandmother off and on lived with us, but she and my father didn't get along, so she'd move out and then she'd move back in, and so it was back and forth. And we had a big network family. We had my mother's sisters, and my father had 5 brothers and sisters in their family, so it was a big family. And that was, my father's family were very American. They were all married. My father was the only one married to a non-American person. The special word for a non-American Jew was called a maki. And that was a terrible word. And once in a while, my father's family would refer to me as the Maki's son, and I hated that, because my mother spoke Yiddish and didn't speak English. So it was a divide.
And how did that divide manifest itself in the home?
Well, it didn't manifest in the home as much as my feelings. But I loved my mother's family, and I really didn't like my father's family. Found them, they were strange to me. They were not. They didn't have our customs, our ways, our mannerisms. So there was a barrier, And I loved my mother had 2 sisters. Her older sister had been an opera singer, but since she came to America, she didn't pursue that. But she had a beautiful voice. We sang in Yiddish, and I loved going to my Aunt Pearl's house. She was a wonderful cook, and she would always sing, and I loved her music. And the other sister played in the mandolin orchestra in New York City, and she was completely involved with Jewish culture and Jewish language and everything Jewish. And so it was a very Jewish world we lived in. When I went to Poland, I felt very, very, very much at home there. And I felt I grew up in Brooklyn, Poland, because I felt my life was so much more like the life that I saw in Poland than it was American life,
As a young boy, you spoke Yiddish with your grandmother. Can you tell me more about her?
Oh, my bubby. My bubby. She was a vegetarian. We don't know why, but she took an oath sometimes in her young life that if something happened, she would give up meat. And she mostly she ate apples. Her room was full of apples, and she smelled like apples. She never changed her clothes from the turn of the century, so she wore high-button shoes, and she wore long black dresses with little white flowers and sleeves with lace at the end, up to here and up to here. And she wore a sheitel, which was red. But her own hair would peek out. I always couldn't figure out why Aunt Bubby had red hair up here and white hair on the sides, And then one day, my mother was in business years later, and I was around 9, 10 years old, and my bubby was sleeping, and my mother said, "Go wake her up, we're going to have some tea." And I went into the bedroom, it was dark. My bubby was in the bed, but her head was on the dresser. And I came out screaming, "Bubby's head is on the dresser." No. She explained to me, Bubby has a sheitel, and that's a form. And she says, she's okay. So I learned my bubby was wearing a wig. I didn't know that. But she had the most amazing earlobes. She had 2 sort of silver raspberry earrings that hung down her long earlobes, and the holes of earlobes were really, really big. And she was living there with my Aunt Pearl. There was a stoop. And she sat on the stoop on the chair, and she'd always teach me Yiddish songs. And if I sat the right angle while she's teaching me, I could look through her earlobes into the window and see my Aunt Pearl combing her hair. So I used to line myself and look through the world at my bubby's the hole in her ear, because she had these wonderful big earlobes with these big holes, you see. And so I don't know if that's answering you, but anyway, that's what my memories are for Bubby. She was wonderful. She was great. And I still miss her to this day. They didn't let me go to the funeral because they thought I'd be hurt. But I think I was more damaged by not going and saying goodbye to her. And so I didn't ever go. And I still feel she's around somehow, which maybe is not a bad thing.
Can you tell me more about your relationship with her in the home?
Well, my bubby loved schmatas, schmatas, junk. And when you saw her coming, she'd be coming down the street. I could see it 2 blocks away, walking. And she'd go, and in those days in New York, you put your garbage in front of the house to be picked up. And she'd go to every garbage pail. And she'd bring me trucks and dolls. And but all stuff, and my mother would throw it out. She said, "You can't have it. It's schmutzig from the garbage." And she would yell at my grandmother, "Was tust du? What are you doing? Why are you giving it to him such junk?" And I used to then take it out of the garbage and clean it up. And I loved the toy she brought me. You know, she brought me a boat that was half broken, but I used to take it to the water in the ocean in the Rockaway, and it was fine. You know, so we had a special relationship. And she also had. She sold buttons. There was a street in Brooklyn called Blake Avenue where people had push carts, and they would sell bananas, and they would sell pants, and they would sell everything from push carts. And my bubby had a stand, outside of a kosher butcher shop, she had a stand where she put bricks and boards, and she sold buttons. I don't think 2 buttons matched. But people just come looking for a button that matched a dress they had, and they'd find buttons. But while she was doing that, people would go into the back of the butcher shop, was cages full of chickens. And people would come and pick out a chicken and then have the shochet slaughter it and bring it to my grandma to flick it. She was a chicken flicker. So she'd sit there selling buttons and flicking chickens. And when she got to the pin feathers, she'd singe them with a little like a Bunsen burner. And I love that smell to this day, the smell of burnt feathers. You know, but I used to sit with her and try to sell buttons and clean up the feathers after she had a big bunch around her. And it was like magic. She was a magical lady for me. You know, flicked chickens, sold buttons, told stories. You know, had 2 colors hair. You know, earlobes you could look through. Amazing lady.
What was important about that relationship with her to you?
I knew she loved me. We had a special bond. I just knew it. My sister didn't care for her at all and has no memories hardly of her. My brother wasn't born. He's named for her. He was born a year after she died. But we had a special relationship, and I thought she was magic. To me, she was just wonderful. Also, I used to go to her room, and she went to shul every day, every single day. She was very, very orthodox, very religious, and very superstitious also. A little bit of witch, you know. And I'd go into her room, and she'd be sitting in her rocking chair. She had 1 window in her room, and there's a book called Sen Oren, a woman's prayer book, and she'd be sitting there and davening and crying, and you know, and I just loved watching her, and she'd sort of withdraw from me, and even that was wonderful because I just would watch her, and her body language was so different than anyone else that I knew in my world in those days, you know.
Do you remember which shul she attended?
I know it was on Wyona Street. I don't know the name of the shul, but years later, when I got married in Winnipeg, the rabbi who married me had been the rabbi of that shul on Wyona Street, and I had to prove I was Jewish. I said, "How can you ask me to prove I speak Yiddish? I speak Hebrew. I know your shul on Wyona Street." My bubby was, you have to get me, you know, I had to get documents to show that I was Jewish for him, you know. But that's I don't remember the name of the shul, no.
Your family subscribed to several newspapers?
Yes. Yeah, we always had daily, the forwards and the tug. I would go to the store around the corner, Beast Candy Store, and I'd pick up 2 newspapers. And then on Shabbos, weekends, the Bialystoker came. That was a special newspaper, a weekly newspaper from my mother's town of Bialystok. She was very proud of her city. And I remember it was sepia colored. It was brown. It wasn't black and white. It was sepia tones. And my bubby would insist that I read the captions. It was all full of pictures, pictures that were current events. And I had to read all the captions under each picture, and I used to love doing that for them. They were so proud of me that I could read Yiddish. Yeah.
When did you read the newspapers?
I was about 8, 9, 10 years old. It wasn't the newspaper; it was just the captions under each. It was a whole paper full of pictures. Bialystok it was called, and it was my job to read the captions, you know. And I used to read for them. I don't know how well I did it, but I read, and they were proud, you know.
Did your family ever listen to the radio
growing up? Yes, we listened to Jewish radio all the time, all the time. We used to come home from school for lunch, and there was always Yiddish programs on the radio, and in the evening there'd be Yiddish programs. There was a serial, I remember Kinder mit Onaheim, Children Without a Home, that we used to listen to once a week, and it was really a tearjerker. And yeah, my mother always said WEVD was on all the time. And also every Thursday night my family would go to a special store to buy records, 1 record a week. And we could pick it out. It was either Yiddish or Russian. Those were the only 2 kinds of records we had. Russian music, we loved Russian music, and Yiddish music. So we had a fantastic collection of 78s. You know, but every Thursday we got a new one, and we had to talk about what we're getting. You know.
Do you remember any of the names of the artists?
Oh, sure. Of course I do. Yeah, the Barry sisters, Jan Pierce, Moshe Kosovitsky, Prince Nazimov. Prince Nazimov in New York City. Nazaroff or Nazimov? I think it was Nazimov. He used to, he was a batchin. You know what a batchin is? A batchin is, at a wedding, you would have somebody come along and he would make you laugh and cry. He would tell bride, you're going to be married now, your mother's going to make you crazy, you're going to have to work, and your husband's going to abandon you. And then he'd make you laugh and cry, laugh and cry. It was like Chinese food, sweet and sour. Anyway, but my mother had a business in a place called Rockaway, and people went to the beach. It was the second house on the beach, and that's what they did. But on a rainy day, what did you do? They sat on the porch, and Prince Nazimov would go from house to house, and he would come on the porch and ask your name, and then make a song about you, right on the spot, rhyming, on the spot, you know. And we used to wait for him to come, and then he had records, so we had some of his records also, you know. But yeah.
Did you read as a young child?
Yeah, an avid reader. I had a big library of books. Yeah, I used to read a lot. Yeah, but mostly my reading. Here's what happened. My mother had two brothers, and her father, my grandfather. I've never met them, and their families, and they all died in the Holocaust. And then when the war was over, my mother wrote to the Red Cross to find out what happened to a family. And about a year later, in '46, a letter came one day, and it said they were all gone, and told my mother the story of as much as they knew. And that gave me a tremendous feeling of guilt. While I was going to Rockaway Beach with my mother every summer and eating ice cream cones and hanging out with my friends, my family was dying. And so I decided I had to do something. And what I had to do is I had to do something for my people in return for the fact that I didn't suffer. So I developed the idea of Zionism. I was going to go to Israel, I was going to live in a kibbutz, and I was going to work, and I was going to do something for my people by building a new country. So I became an avid Zionist. I read every book on Israel and Palestine, and then I went into Egyptian history. Anything that was even a bit tangential to Judaism, I wanted to have also. I just used every book in the library. I just bring home 7, 8 books, and so became a Zionist. And eventually, I joined a Zionist organization because I found there were other people like me who also wanted to do something about building a home. And so that became my life after that. And that got me to Israel, of course.
You mentioned feeling guilty about having a nice time.
Yeah, well,
what did your parents think about your feelings?
They didn't know. That was my secret. I never told anybody what I was feeling. Never told anybody until years later. They had no idea. Just knew I was interested in Israel, but they didn't know that my motivation was the fact that my mother's family, my family, were all killed, and while I was enjoying myself and not feeling anything. And so I needed to, I made a vow to myself I would do something with my life to balance it out somehow, you know. And so, when I went to Israel, I was miserable at first. I went in 1950. I was homesick, and I got sick in Israel. And one of our neighbors, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, Mrs. Kessler, lived next door. And she gave me, just as I was leaving to go to Israel, she gave me the Black Book of Polish Jewry, a book with pictures and documents all about the Holocaust. And when I was in Israel, really homesick, I would look at that book every night, and I knew I couldn't leave. This book kept me there. Until about a year later, I was no longer feeling homesick. But for the first year, I felt homesick every single night. I wanted to go home. And that book kept me there.
Thank you. I want to get back to talking about your family.
Yes.
What were the most important holidays or events during the year growing up for your family?
Jewish holidays. We didn't know about Goyish holidays. We knew Christians had Christmas. We lived in an all-Jewish neighborhood. So I think I liked Simchat Torah the best of all, because we'd go to shul down the corner. There was a shul in every block, but the shul down the corner, Mrs. Shulman used to make chickpeas called arbas, big wooden barrel full with lots of pepper. And I used to we could eat all and then you had an apple with a fan, a flag, and a candle, and you walked around with this candle. They don't allow that now because of fire regulations, but in those days they didn't have that. And it was just wonderful walking around, taking out the toyre, dancing with the toyre. So I liked that holiday. I liked Pesakh. I liked Hanukkah. It was not like today. We got some money. We used to play cards on Hanukkah and roll hazelnuts put a board on a slant and roll them and draw a line. Whoever got close to the line won all the hazelnuts. And I liked all the holidays. We celebrated them all some way or the other. Some were happy, some were sad. But I went to Jewish school. My mother was also, my father didn't care about religion, so he stayed out of it most of the time. He wasn't part of it. He liked the food.
Were there any foods you particularly liked celebrating these holidays?
I liked everything my mother cooked. I thought she was a wonderful cook. My sister says, Mama was a terrible cook. I said, to me, she was wonderful. So whatever she made balinces, and she made kugel, that was great. And she made rice pudding. And we had bagels and lox every Sunday morning, of course, like most Jewish New York families. And I liked it all. I liked it a lot, I'd never eaten treif. I remember the first time I ever ate treif, it was like really felt, to this day, if I eat shrimp or pork, and I do, I always feel guilty about it. I'm aware I'm eating it, I'm aware that it's not just food. It's something that I shouldn't be doing, but I do because I like it. I don't care anymore, But we grew up in eating Jewish food.
Why do you think you'd feel guilty about eating?
Because it was inculcated into me as a young age that this is treif, this is forbidden. We're not supposed, Jews don't eat this. I don't really believe that much that food is that important. My grandchildren would die if they heard me saying this because they're so firm, they're so ultra-Orthodox, but they know that I'm not kosher. So I break taboos because I really don't care about rules like that. I don't think that God really cares about what I put into my mouth. And so I eat it, but I'm always aware when I'm eating it that I'm eating something I shouldn't be eating. The thought never fails to pass my mind.
Is that difficult to engage with?
No, not at all. I've done it for so long now that it's not, I remember being in Paris and some friends took me to a very, very good restaurant. They said, don't ask what you're going to have. So I ate this dish and it was delicious. And finally I said, what is it? And they said, it's calamari. I said, what's it? They said, squid. And I felt I had to throw up. I didn't throw up, but I felt I got sick, the idea. So I knew it was psychological. I enjoyed the food. Once I knew what it was, then I got sick on it because it was calamari, squid, But no, I don't, it's not a struggle, it's just something I'm aware of, and I think, that's the Jew in me, The Jew in me is aware that that's forbidden food, but it's good. No more than that, yeah.
Okay. I'd like to talk about the community and neighborhood now. So you were born and grew up in Brooklyn, New York during the 30s and 40s. Can you describe your neighborhood?
Yes, it was mostly Jewish, and it was a very close neighborhood. We lived in each other's homes. We shared. My mother, if she cooked, she'd send food over to a neighbor. The neighbor cooked. We also had a few Italian families. They joined us also. But Mary, who lived next door, was Italian, knew that we were kosher, so she would send over, if she made something that we could eat, then she would send over spoons and plates, so my mother wouldn't allow us. So in the backyard, we could eat it. So I was eating treif even then, I guess, with Mary. But she was the only person whose food I ate that was not Jewish. Other than that, we ate in each other's homes. We did homework together in each other's homes. We played ball on the street, and it was a very a very good neighborhood, and we had a good life on the street.
Did you live in a Jewish specific area?
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, it was a very Jewish neighborhood, and you could get by just speaking Yiddish in that neighborhood. A lot of the kids would play on the street in Yiddish because our parents spoke Yiddish at home, and I really started to learn English really when I went to kindergarten. I told you I went to yeshiva for a few weeks, and I went to public school. And in the public school, they had Yiddish-speaking teachers in kindergarten, Mrs. Weissman, who could speak to me the first few days in Yiddish. And it didn't take me long, I don't think how long, a month, and I was speaking English. I probably knew some of it because I had heard it, but the fact is that they had to edge us in. So the kids, and my class was 98% Jewish. We may have had one Italian girl, I remember, who was in our class, and one Jewish backstory, a little black boy was in our class, and the rest was all Jewish. So in many ways, they had more trouble fitting in than we did,
Who were your friends growing up in the neighborhood?
Oh, well, every kid on the street was my friend. There was, my friend had an Italian friend, Sonny, he was my best pal. I had a friend, Marty, he lived a few blocks away. Then there were two girls on the street who were my class, Rosie and Elaine. There was the doctor's son, Lionel. The street was full of kids my age. But what happened was that I was about 9 years old, and one day my father and mother and I went for a spazier. That's just a nameless walk, a stroll. We used to do that after dinner. And we walked, and on the corner of my street there was an empty store. It had been empty for years, it seemed to me. It was, I thought of it as a haunted place. And we walked up to that store, and I looked at the window, and I saw boys and girls dancing, horrors, dancing in circles, and I felt there was something going on in that room that was something I needed to help to be part of. but I couldn't walk in. I didn't belong there. It was a club of some sort. And they all were wearing blue shirts with white strings here. And I saw them, and I thought about them. And for about a month, I used to look through the window. And then one day they were gone. And I felt like I'd lost something. And about 2 months later, I was walking way down on Sutter Avenue, way out of my neighborhood. And I see people with blue shirts and white going upstairs into a building. So I followed them up. And it was them again. They had moved. And they became my life. That was a Zionist organization, very left-wing. And I had all new friends then. And I lived my life there. I was always there. Every day of the week I would go there. And Saturday and Sunday we were together. And Friday night was a big night for us. And there my two worlds came together, my interest in Zionism and this movement which was going to take you to Israel.
Can you tell me the name of this organization?
Hashem the Young Guard. You've heard of it?
Yes.
Oh, okay, Hashem. It was wonderful.
What sort of activities did you do?
We used to go on picnics. We used to go to see. We had a thing. About 8 of us. We would go on a Saturday night. We would go on by train to Manhattan, and we waited till the plays were half through. People go out into the street during the theater, and especially if it was a play that had been on for a while. Then we go into the theater and hold back until we could see what seats were empty and see the second half of every single thing on Broadway. And before that, we'd go to Rappaport's restaurant on the Lower East Side, because if you went in there and you ordered a cup of coffee, you had access to a big metal bin full of onion rolls. And so there'd be 8 of us, and one would order coffee, and the rest of us would grab all the rolls, and they never said a word to us, So we all had rolls to eat. That was enough, And we could go into the city and have a wonderful time in Manhattan, see a play, walk around, eat rolls, and go home. And the whole thing was the cost of a subway ticket, So that was an activity. We used to go into summer camp together up in the Catskill Mountains. We had a big summer camp, and I loved going there every year. And mostly we had classes on Zionism, on Marxism. We read Das Kapital from Karl Marx, of course, and we had to learn about dialectical materialism, But we also learned Hebrew songs and Yiddish songs, and talked about Israel. And we also had something known as shlichim, a couple who would come from Israel for 2 years to be with us and to inculcate us into Israeli life. And they were magical people. They were really wonderful. There was a new kind of a Jew, not like my mother, not my father, but people who had lived and worked in a farm and had muscles, and somehow, and didn't wear makeup and had a purpose in life. And I was really mesmerized. I wanted to be just like them, So it was. I don't know if I've answered your question.
How did you use Yiddish in this organization?
Only we didn't. All of us spoke Yiddish, most of us, because most of us were kids of parents who had come from the old country. So Yiddish was a common thing. We sang in Yiddish songs, Yiddish folk songs. I remember one girl from California, Shoshana, who taught me how to eat my first avocado, and she sang the song Margarit Kalach. It's a wonderful Yiddish folk song. I'd never heard it before for some reason. And I loved her because she sang so beautifully, and I love that song. I still do to this day. And so we learned Yiddish songs, we learned Russian songs, communist songs. We sang Italian communist songs of Antipopolo, and we also made fun of the American government. Goodbye America, goodbye forever. We are off to Palestine because we are so clever. Things like that. Goodbye Yankee fashions, to hell with your depressions. And things like that. So it was a sort of a very renegade kind of group. We were doing very brave things, we thought. But the idea was we would all go live in a kibbutz and be farmers and milk cows and spend our lives rebuilding the Jewish people. That was our goal, and I did. I did.
You mentioned earlier you attended the Yiddish theater
yes.
in Manhattan.
Well, in Brooklyn first. My first memory was I was about 4 years old, and we went to the Hopkinson Theater, which was very close to. It was like a short bus ride. It was a Yiddish theater in Brooklyn, and I'd never been to the theater before that of any kind. And the curtains parted, and the reds were redder than anything I'd ever seen, and the blues, the colors were magnificent. I couldn't get over the colors. The play was a love story. I don't think I understood it. Not to understand Yiddish, but I understand love. I was a little boy. Didn't matter. I loved the colors. I loved the lights. I loved where I was sitting. And then we went all the time to 2nd Avenue and also to Hopkinson whenever there was. My mother loved theater, and we went with her to the theater a lot. And then later on, of course, I learned there was also Broadway. I never knew there was an English theater. I thought theater was a Jewish thing, But we went to the theater a lot, and Yiddish movies also, because we had a lot of Yiddish movies playing in those days. And to this day, I have a club, and once a month I showed them one of those Yiddish films from the 1930s, and they love it, because it's great documents.
Do you have any favorite actors or performances?
Well, of course, there's Molly Pekin, and there's Maurice Schwartz, and and Herschel Bonatti, the young Herschel Bonatti, and Grünefelde, a lot of them. But I don't know if I have it. It isn't these films weren't that great. Maybe the Dybbuk was great, and there were a few good ones. Most of them were really B movies. It's what they preserved. The streets, the body language, the clothing, the gestures, the language. And so when I look at these films, I'm looking at them not much for the artistry, though sometimes it's there. I'm looking for a way of life that has by accident been documented on film. Especially those films made in Poland. These people knew. When Norman Jewison made Fiddler on the Roof, it's Jewish life is seen through the eyes of a non-Jew, and it's nice. It's a wonderful film, but something is missing. And when you see Tevye the Milchake, which is the same story as and with Maurice Schwartz, you just know that this is how life was. This is how my grandparents lived their lives, my great-grandparents. And so I love the Yiddish films because of that,
Do you remember how you reacted to seeing these performances as a young boy?
It's like my mother telling me a great story. I just would my jaw would drop open, my eyes would get big, and I just sit there and I just let it wash over me. I just loved it. I loved it, But I still do that when I see a great movie today. I feel the same way. I just love being told a good story.
Can you briefly tell me about your education, both in terms of general education and Jewish life?
Well, I went to public school, but at the same time I went to Yiddish school once a week and to Hebrew school to my bar mitzvah. But then I took Hebrew in high school. They allowed us to have Hebrew as a foreign language. So I took Hebrew because I was preparing to go to Israel. And then I graduated high school. I was very young. I was 15 when I graduated. Because I had something rapid advance where you could skip a term every other term, and I kept on skipping. So when I was 15, my father and I had a really bad relationship, and I was getting bigger. My mother was afraid that I was going to defend myself. He used to beat me badly all the time, and so she was afraid. So when I said I want to go to Israel, my Aunt Pearl, my mother's older sister, had passed away and left me a few $1,000s. She said, we had just discovered that my mother's cousin, Riva, in Paris, Renee, had survived the Holocaust and was hidden in an attic, and she was in Paris living with the man who saved her life. Her husband was killed. And another Riva, who was a Yiddish actress, had been in Uzbekistan, and she came to Paris to play in the theater. Her name was Riva Kolesnikov. She and her husband were well-known Yiddish actors. And then their two brothers, had survived and were in Israel and married and had families. And a cousin was in London. So my mother planned that I should go to London, go to Paris, meet the mishpacha, and then go to Israel. So it was very cheap. It was like $75 from Marseille to Haifa, I remember. So I went to London, and my cousin met me in London. And I remember I went on the Queen Elizabeth, the boat, the first. And there was mostly old people on that ship. And there was a young man, 19, 18 years old, who was from Idaho, I think, and he was going to go to England, Europe, to ride the bike. But since I was the only other young person, we used to hang out together. But he was a goy. And I'd heard stories about goyim, you see. So he scared me. He was a good American boy, a bicycle guy, young kid. He didn't kill Jews. But to me, I didn't know. I heard about goyim. I knew the people on my street were not goyim. And the non-Jews I met were black or Italian. They weren't goyim. So he must be it. So he wanted to know if I wanted to share a room with him when we got to London. So my cousin was at the train where you get off the boat and you take a train from Southampton to London. And I said, get him away from me. He said, what's wrong? I said, he's a goy. My cousin, he's crazy. So he said, okay. So we moved. I felt badly about that. I never said goodbye to this kid, And so I was in London with my cousin for a month, and I went to Paris. And I thought my family had written ahead to my aunt, or my cousin. I call her an aunt because she's older than me. She's my second cousin. I thought my family had written I was coming. So I get to Paris, and nobody's there to meet me. So I didn't have much money. So I found a very cheap hotel. It was a brothel, actually. I didn't know it. Run by some Chinese people. I had a room way at the top floor. And all I had was a note from my aunt, and she wrote, the name of the street was CHA, and I couldn't make out, it was like a long line. It could be any letter of the alphabet. Thank God the phone books in Paris are arranged not by name, but by address. So all the streets are arranged alphabetically. So I found about 7 streets that start with CHA. And I spent the next 2 days walking to every one of those streets till I found Rue Chaudron. And I found a house. The number was where I could read. And my aunt, the cousin, Riva, was in Holland. And the concierge came to the door and said, no, you know what a concierge is? It's, it was like an atrium house with a tall building. And that's the house she was hidden in throughout the war in an attic. And so she said, she's in Holland. So I went back to the hotel, and all I had to eat was, I would go out every day and buy a loaf of French bread and a brie cheese, and my little brother's kindergarten teacher had come to the boat to say goodbye to me for some reason. She brought me a big round thing full of sucking candies, coffee. So every night I put a candy into a glass of water, and you shouldn't drink the water in France anyway, those days. And I would dissolve so in the morning I had dissolved candy and a piece of cheese and bread, and and I tried to make that last the whole day. That went for about 2 days, till about the third day, I hear voices through the elevator. Azaroff, I go downstairs, and there's Riva. She's come back from Holland. She took me back to her apartment, and it was an amazing apartment. It had no bath, no toilet. To wash, you went to the public bath once a week. Otherwise, you had a big schissel, and you washed yourself. And she was a wonderful cook, and I loved her food. Her French fried potatoes were unbelievable. Her steaks were great. But one day we went to the store to buy some meat, and it was horse meat. I saw a dead horse in the window, and I realized she's buying pieces of that horse. So I never ate meat again after that in her house. I didn't know. And I stayed there for about a few weeks, and then I took a train to Marseille and got on the boat, and the Negba. It was 4 days from Marseille to Haifa. And that was a story in itself, because on that boat were two famous people, Lena Horne and Sholem Ash. Lena Horne, I think I saw her once, I'm not even sure. It was in that boat, and the whole steerage was full of Moroccan children being taken to Israel, orphans and children, I don't know, but a whole boatload of children. And she was down there all the time with them. She had married a Jewish guy in Paris, a French Jew, and so she was in those days quite involved with Jewish things in Israel. But up on board, on the top deck, the ship was full of people from Austria, from France, from all countries, all going to Israel to see families they hadn't seen since the war, before the war. And sitting on top of the ship holding court was Sholem Ash. And he's talking about how wonderful America is, how the Jews in America are rich and they have power and they're, it's wonderful. And I was a left-winger, so I would say things like there are poor Jews in America and they're exploited. And then I finally, to seal the whole thing off, I said what my mother used to say about him, and everybody knows you converted to Christianity because he wrote books about Jesus and Mary. His purpose was to show their Jewishness, but people misunderstood him. Anyway, he grabbed me by the neck, wanted to kill me. He started to choke me. So they pulled him away from me, and they said to me, I cannot be in the same room with him. And I got to Haifa, and waiting at the port, there was my two uncles, I call them uncles, but they're my mother's cousins, Meisha and Herschel, and they're calling Azaroff, and I waved to them, and I came down, and they took me to Meisha. My uncle Meisha lived in Haifa with his wife and family. It was very close by to the port, and they had a big party, about 30, 40 people in that room, all knowing my mother, my grandmother, all glad to see me. And it was really, I was overwhelmed, too fast, And then they all left, and at night, Meisha had 2 children. They weren't his children. His family had died in the Holocaust. He married a woman who was widowed, who had a boy and a girl, and the girl's, Fanny, had the same name as Meisha's daughter who was killed. So he really loved Fanny like she was a reincarnation of his daughter. And there was a happy marriage, too. He loved Carola. She was a wonderful woman. So I took Fanny and Avi, the 2 kids, for a walk on Herzl Street in Haifa and bought them ice cream. And I bought myself an ice cream cone. It was terrible. It was saccharine. I threw it away, and the kids were so insulted. Why did you throw it away? They said to me. And I said, because they didn't like it. They said, you should have given it to us, because they was terrible austerity in Israel at the time, terrible austerity. In fact, the next day, Fanny was eating my Colgate's toothpaste. She thought it was delicious. She was licking it. She thought it was wonderful. Anyway, so there was great poverty in Israel at the time. It was,
As a native Yiddish speaker, what was it like to be in Israel during this time?
My Meisha never learned Hebrew, and his wife Carola came from Poland, so they spoke Yiddish. Even the kids knew Yiddish. But it was funny because I spoke American Yiddish. So when my mother had written a letter to them telling about ich habe a 4-room apartment. But in Israel they say ich habe a 14 dire. So not room apartment, but a dire, and not Oh, anyway, so my aunt says to me, your mother is sick. I said, no, she's not sick. Yes, your mother wrote she has rheumatism. Vier Ruhm. She thought that meant she has rheumatism. I said, no, no. And I didn't know how to say toyre in those days, but I learned very quickly. There was American Yiddish and there was Yiddish Yiddish, and I had to learn to speak Yiddish Yiddish. But also Carola came from Warsaw, and she had a Polish accent. And when I came back to America years later, and I said yo instead of yeah, which a Litvak says, my mother says, where did you learn to speak that way? You know, because I learned to speak from Carola, her kind of Yiddish a little bit too, you know. But then my aunt says I knew some Hebrew, and within a few months, I was very young and I knew some Hebrew. I was speaking Hebrew, you know, maybe not the best, but over the years I went to university in Hebrew, so I was in the army, but I spoke Hebrew pretty quickly.
Were you conscious of yourself as a native Yiddish speaker in Israel?
I know that we weren't allowed to speak it on the street. When we walk, we'd speak Yiddish in the house, but on the street she'd speak Polish, German, anything, but not Yiddish. Broken Hebrew. It was forbidden. They even had language police. If you spoke Yiddish, they'd stop you from speaking Yiddish. It was against the law. And Ben-Gurion hated Yiddish. During the war, a girl escaped from the Vilna ghetto who was my teacher eventually. Rushka Korshak was her name. And Rushka came to Israel during the war. She managed to get out of Europe and come to Israel. And she spoke to, before there was an Israeli government, before there was an Israel, there was the Sachnut, the Jewish agency, which became the government later on. And she addressed all of them in Yiddish. And Ben-Gurion said, a lovely girl, too bad she speaks that ugly language. He hated Yiddish. And he had laws passed not to allow Yiddish theater, Yiddish newspapers, Yiddish speaking on the street. They would actually cost you on the street if you spoke Yiddish.
How was that experience for you?
I don't know. The strange one I do remember was really, shocks me to this day. One day I was walking with my aunt down the street and she ran into a neighbor who obviously had a new baby carriage and a new grandchild. And my aunt looked into the carriage and said in Hebrew, Mamash Aryan, a real Aryan. We're talking about 5 years after the Holocaust. The best compliment you could pay to a little blonde baby was he's an Aryan. I was shocked by that. They didn't know. They were saying without being aware how the words were hitting me. But I remember being shocked by that expression, Mamash Aryan, a real Aryan, you know. I was just happy to be there. I wasn't there. I went to a kibbutz very quickly. Within a matter of a few weeks, I went to a kibbutz, and I didn't want to be in an American kibbutz because I didn't want to speak English. So I went to an Argentinian kibbutz because I wouldn't speak Spanish. I speak Hebrew with them. You know, so I wanted to really become Israeli. Yeah, it was important.
How did your relationship with Yiddish evolve or change while in Israel?
It didn't change in Israel, but I started using it less and less as I spoke Hebrew. And it really, when I came to America, when I came back, I lost my citizenship, so I couldn't come back to America. It was during McCarthy days because they said I was a communist, and I was a socialist, but not a communist. So I went to Canada. I went to a lot of places, but I finally ended up in Canada. And in Canada, I taught Hebrew, and then the whole story. When I moved to Vancouver, there was a Yiddish circle. A wonderful man, Chava Bassman from Winnipeg, organized a Yiddish circle for people who spoke Yiddish. And in Canada, there's a lot of young people who spoke Yiddish because they have a very good Yiddish school system. And I joined them. And we would get together once a week and read Yiddish literature. And slowly I realized I've got a treasure I have to hold on to. So that became the beginning of my rediscovery of Yiddish. You know, because even my mother, who always spoke to it in Yiddish, now when I came back from Israel 8 years later, with television, she was reading American back. She had learned English, and she was, you know, I still spoke to her in Yiddish, but she understood English quite well. So but it was in Vancouver, and also my wife's family. I'm divorced, but my wife's family were strong Yiddishists, which is one of the reasons we got together because we both loved Yiddish, and so we spoke Yiddish at home quite often, not for the kids to understand. To this day, but she was visiting just recently, we still communicate in Yiddish. You know.
So you left your parents' home at the age of 15.
15 and a half, yeah.
Yes. How, if at all, did your Jewish identity change after leaving New York?
In Israel, one doesn't need it. You are Jewish. You don't have to, in New York, you had to do things to be Jewish, you know, and you felt you were on the outside, even though it was a very Jewish city. Somehow, Judaism was something you did in addition to being American. In Israel, it was all one piece. You know, it was just... on Jewish holidays, everything was closed. On Shabbat, there was no traffic. On Yom Kippur, the world just closed down. So you couldn't escape being Jewish. You were aware of, you know, something that you just lived. You didn't think about it, You know, you knew that you were part of a Jewish people, and you knew that your people had just gone through a horrible trauma, and there were things you had to do, like living in the kibbutz. And you know, I lived there for almost 3.5 years. I was a shepherd, by the way, which was a wonderful thing to be.
You mentioned in the U.S. you felt like you had to do something to be Jewish. Can you tell me more about that? What you mean by that?
Is that you were aware that you weren't. You were aware that there was Christmas and that wasn't your holiday. You were aware that people, you know, that some of the kids in your class, or some of the kids not in your class, but kids in the block went to communion. They had little black things in their head. You were aware that you were not. You were a minority. That you weren't, even though you felt like a lot of Jews were living in that neighborhood. You were aware that in America it wasn't all Jewish. That your Judaism was something you had to make an effort to observe. Whereas in Israel, you didn't feel that way. At least I didn't feel that way. It was just, I never thought about it really. At first, the first few weeks, I thought that policeman's Jewish, the garbage collector's Jewish. It was such a strange thing, you know. But after a while, you stop thinking about that, you know.
Can you remember a time when you felt particularly Jewish in the U.S.?
No, I can't. I always felt, I've never not felt Jewish. It's my most important thing about me is my Judaism. So I've always felt Jewish. I'm always aware of it. You know, I'm interested in everything Jewish. And no, I can't remember any particular time when I felt more Jewish than others. Maybe my bar mitzvah, I don't know. No, I don't think so. You
mentioned earlier you were involved in Zionism and you were interested in communism. Can you?
Well, socialism. Yes. But I was in a very left-wing organization.
Could you talk about the relationship between Yiddish and your interest in socialism?
Yeah, sure. Because there was a strong movement within Yiddish, the Arbeiterring, and the Bund in Europe. They were anti-Zionist, anti-Hebrew. They were Yiddish. Jews had always been multilingual, but then with the coming of Zionism and socialism in the early 20th century, there was a division. You either chose Israel in Hebrew, and it was Sephardic Hebrew, not Ashkenazi Hebrew, which was also part of the rejection, or you chose Yiddish and socialism, and you would stay behind in the countries and change the economy of Russia, of Poland, of America. And so it was a clear choice. And I was caught between the two of them because I loved Israel, I loved Hebrew, but I had to sort of, in a way, keep a little bit of my, not too much, but to keep a little bit of my Yiddish love a little bit for myself. Because even when I was in the kibbutz, my Argentinian friends all went to Yiddish school, and they all had this love of Yiddish. And so even then, in this environment which I wanted to live in, all Hebrew, still Yiddish popped up as being something we had in common. And Hebrew, in a way, was artificial for a long time. It was something you were learning, something you know. We had many. I remember I was in the kibbutz not long, and I had come back from a hard day in the fields, and I was thirsty, and I wanted to have something to drink. So people were serving the tables, so I asked for a seifel. I know I said I needed a cup of. I would say I needed a cup to drink some juice in. They had cold juice in the table. So instead of saying I want a cup, I said I want seifel is cup and seichel is brains. I said, Ani rotze seichel. I want brains. And they started to laugh because they asked you, do you need seichel, you know? So there's times when funny things happen, you know, with the language. And also, the Hebrew word for bric-a-brac is naknik. The Hebrew word for Frankfurter, hot dog, is naknik. And the English word for bric-a-brac is knick-knack. And I got to the point where I couldn't tell one from the other. I couldn't remember whether I was eating naknik or eating knick-knack. You know, things like that were happening. Confusion. But it worked itself through eventually, you know.
Can you tell me more about your attraction to socialism?
I'm no longer a socialist, you know, but in those days,
when you were younger,
when I was younger,
yeah.
Well, we were taught, we were indoctrinated. That was what they called it. You came to Hashometzia and you were indoctrinated. You had courses in Marxism, and you understood why you must not believe the New York Times. It was a capitalist newspaper. Of course, they wouldn't report about Russia, the truth, and Stalin was our hero. And when I lived in Israel, I was in the army. I remember jumping off the back of a truck because I was hitchhiking, and I was on a truck, and I jumped off, and a man was selling newspapers, and had a great big black border, and the words, Stalin is no more, and a big picture of Joseph Stalin, like a great hero had died. You know, later on we heard about, you know, what horrors he had committed. But we believed it. We were wrong, of course. But it was felt nice to be in a minority. Like you had a truth, as a political truth that nobody else shared, and your truth was going to save the world. You know, that's the way we felt about it. we're going to liberate the workers of the world. It's youth.
Can you elaborate more on this feeling of being a minority and how that played
You mean
into
where?
your
Minority in New York or in
in social, when your attractions to socialism? You just
I didn't feel like
mentioned this.
I actually felt that we had a secret, like a cabal. We had a secret knowledge that nobody else had. It was our job to impart it to others. That we knew the answer to the world's problems. It was all part of Das Kapital, where how labor, how only way a capitalist can make money is by exploiting his workers, by paying them less and charging more for his product, which he then sells to the workers. We had it all worked out. You see, it was so clear, and that once the workers take over the means of production, then all that and we said those things and believed it. The Yiddish word is Narishkeit now. It's not true. We see what happened to communism. But in those days, you were young and you wanted, young kids think they know all the answers.
So I just want to briefly touch back on your childhood.
Yeah.
Looking back on your childhood, what values or practices do you think your parents were trying to pass down to you?
I can tell you the truth, my father passed nothing down. He was a tough guy, and he scared me. Even when I was a grown man and a grandfather, if I spoke to him on the phone and he raised his voice, he didn't know it, but I knew. I was afraid, still always afraid of him. But my mother was a wonderful woman. She was wise, great sense of humor, very broad-minded, and yet very steeped in Yiddishkeit, and she imparted those things to us: the importance of giving charity, of tzedakah, not charity, tzedakah, of following the mitzvot in the Torah, of loving the Jewish people, of loving Jewish culture. All those things became part of it, and are with me to this day. I have a Yiddish club here, and I do it because it's my homage to my mother. It was her language, and I do it as a volunteer. I've got something like 50 people coming to that club at times, and I do it all because it's my way of honoring her. Plus I love it, but because she was a special woman. I mean, we all had mothers that were special women, of course, not just me. But to me, she was my mother, so she was special.
How does your connection to Yiddishkeit and Eastern European Jewish heritage fit into your broader sense of Jewish identity?
I love being an Ashkenazi Jew, but I'm really angry by what I call cultural imperialism, that we don't give equal billing for Sephardic Jews and Mizrahi Jews. In the course of the years as a teacher, I teach adult education, and I've had students who are Sephardi, and I make sure that I spend as much time talking about Sephardi culture and Sephardi heritage as I do Ashkenazi, because I don't like the fact that in America, because the first Jews to come were Ashkenazi, well, not the first, but the ones who came in big numbers, that unless you ate gefilte fish and spoke Yiddish, you weren't a Jew. Well, Sephardim don't eat gefilte fish and don't speak Yiddish, and they're Jews. So I mentioned the plurality of Judaism. I like all the different ethnicities of Judaism, the subdivisions, not just Ashkenazi. I am an Ashkenazi, but I would imagine my Sephardic friends are as happy to be Sephardim and love it as much as I love my culture.
In your life and your family, how does that connection, your Ashkenazi connection and your Yiddish connection, fit into your sense of Jewishness?
It is my sense of Jewishness, more than the religion in a way. It's that love of Eastern Europe. When I went to Eastern Europe, I felt at home. I really felt at home there. People, the body language, the way they moved, the way they used their eyes, everything was so familiar to me. I really felt I was at home. But it's just part of my essence. I really can't separate it. I don't know how to answer that question. It's the most important thing about me.
How, if at all, has language influenced your sense of identity?
Again, listen to my English. The intonation is, it's Yiddish. It's everything. Partly it's growing up in New York City in a very Yiddish environment. When I lived in Canada, I met Canadian Jews. They were so Canadian, so they didn't live with the intensive numbers, and maybe because they were more acculturated, more integrated into society. I don't know why. But Jews growing in New York, even Jews, I remember I had cousins from Ohio, and whenever they came to visit us, I found their language, the R's, surprise and river, and I heard such a strange, harsh language, and they didn't have the softness of New York City language, and I thought they can't be Jewish. They pronounce their R's. I always spelled surprise without an R. And the second, I was just surprised, never surprised. But so I remember hearing the R's and calling things a seesaw, a teeter tartar, and a lollipop was a sucker. And I thought it was all such a strange thing. But in New York City, even the non-Jews were Jewish, because they spoke English like we all did. My friends did the same intonations. It's just part of the culture. It's distinctive.
So you also speak Hebrew.
Yes.
How do you see these two languages in your life? Like in terms of the way you use them?
I don't know how to answer that. I really think that modern Hebrew is Yiddish with Hebrew words.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, it's not my idea. Other people have said this, and I've read books about it. But that the first people, Eliezer ben Yehuda, who revived the Hebrew language, was a Yiddish-speaking Jew. All the first Zionists who came to Israel, who created the modern Hebrew language, were Yiddish speakers, and so they took. It's not biblical Hebrew they speak in Israel, it's modern Hebrew. And modern Hebrew, very often, it sounds a lot like Yiddish. Like when you walk into a room, in Yiddish you say, was hält sich? And in Hebrew you say, ma nishma? And the same intonation, the same Talmudic intonation. So it's a matter of changing the words. I didn't have to do much more than that. The words fell into the same place, and the expressions were often, the idioms were often the same idioms. So it's just a matter of new words around the same sort of stem. And there are theories. There are people who are linguists who claim that modern Hebrew is really, well, first of all, Yiddish is a Slavic language because the Jews lived in Slavic lands, and even though the words are Hebrew and German, the grammar is Slavic. When I studied in Vilna and in Oxford too, the students who came from the Slavic lands learned Yiddish grammar like this. And the German speakers, people in Germany and Austria, found a lot of difficulty with Yiddish because the grammar is so different. The words may be familiar, but then they throw some Hebrew in that, and then they're lost. But so there's a theory that Yiddish is a Slavic language, as is Hebrew, because it's based. I'm not saying that as though I know what I'm talking about. I just guess that, and it feels comfortable to me. But I don't really feel a dichotomy between the two.
You've mentioned you've participated in numerous Yiddish programs around the world.
Yeah.
Can you describe the programs you've attended?
I went to one week course in Rutgers, and that was 95 or 96, and that really pushed me over the top as far as I really needed to go back and study Yiddish. So then I went on a trip the next year in 97, I took a trip to Eastern Europe because it was the commemoration of the 200th anniversary of the Vilna Gaon. I wanted to go because family's related. So I learned that in Vilna they had a Yiddish program first year, and I went back the next year. It was, I think, 7 weeks I spent in Vilna. I loved Vilna. I had wonderful teachers. And I fell in love with learning proper Yiddish again, grammar and reading literature and being exposed to different theories and meeting people from all over the world who were learning Yiddish too. And so the following year I went to Oxford. I heard it was a very good program. I didn't care for it at all. I thought it was terrible. I liked my teacher, Gennady Esret, was wonderful, but the program was a shambles. It was, everything could be wrong was wrong with it. It was terrible. And the next year I went to Columbia, and that was very good. It was 8 weeks. I spent went a whole summer in New York City, and I enjoyed that tremendously. And then, and after that, I've gone to various conferences. I've met other Yiddishists. I translated a book. There's a Yiddish author who lived in Vilna in the 1860s, Isaac Mayer Dick, and I discovered this book had not been translated into English. So I and a friend, she teaches Renaissance literature at Barry University, and she came from a Yiddish-speaking home, and I taught her how to read, and all of a sudden she realized this is my language. I know it anyway. She knew the vocabulary, just couldn't read it. So we started to read, and we came across this book by Dick. The joke was, I come into her house, she says, "Paul, have you brought your dick with you?" I said, "Yes, I've got it." But anyway, so we translated the book into English. It took us 4 years, and it was published.
Which book?
It's called The Shopkeepers of Vilna, I think it was called. I forget the name. But it was a small. It's a novella, and we did it bilingual. One side was Yiddish and one side was English, and it was difficult. It was difficult because there were things you don't have footnotes in a novel, but we had footnotes because for instance, they're talking about she looked like she had just after Nila. Well, unless you know that Nila is the last prayer of Yom Kippur, they've been fasting for 25 hours, you don't know it means that the person who hasn't eaten for 25 hours. So you have to put a footnote, because there's no way we're doing that in English. So we found that was something we had to compromise and put footnotes every page, especially when it came to holidays. It was one part of the book where she says he was 25 years old, and another man would have been married and divorced 50 times by now. Well, it just so happens that in Europe, when a man was a traveler, and he had to, that on Mondays he would divorce his wife and marry her on Friday, because if he was killed or disappeared and there weren't two witnesses, she's an aguna, an anchored woman. She can never marry anybody else. And so he would give her a quick divorce and marry again on Friday. And so you had to have a footnote. And the book was full of footnotes, but the traditions in it were just amazing. And he talks about this ugly custom of women wearing white sheets. The women would dress up and cover themselves and then cover their whole bodies with a white sheet like a burqa. And I've seen pictures now of women in Eastern Europe and during the 19th century dressed that way. That they would just, like the burqa, they dress up and bundle up and to get rid of their shape, and then on top of that put a white sheet and walk around the streets. So it was a fascinating undertaking of research, of amazing research, because also a lot of Slavic words. It took 4 years.
What did you get out of translating this novella?
The richness of the language, the beauty of the language, the integration of the language and the religion and the customs, and everything was all mixed together. It was wonderful. It was a great, and the fact that he writes in a colloquial Yiddish, he writes the way people speak, because prior to him, really, books were written in Yiddish, in a kind of stilted Germanic Yiddish that nobody spoke, but the rabbis decreed this was the proper Yiddish for women. Like if you read the Sena Rena, it's not written in a language that nobody spoke. And after Dick really came Sholem Aleichem and Mendel Mochasfarim and Peretz, who picked up that and wrote the colloquial language that people spoke, and that's what made them such great writers. They probably put my words on a page. Well, for me, it was wonderful coming that close to that language, and seeing how much of it I had and how much of it I'd lost. So much of my Yiddish was Americanized in America, So getting back to that purity of sound,
What did you learn from translating this
Well,
work?
lots of customs, amazing customs. There's one part where she has one daughter, a woman in the book has one daughter who's not getting married, so she calls in a soothsayer, and the woman takes hot lead and melts it and pours it into water, and then takes the shapes that form and tells the future through shapes. And then I heard later on in other books that they did it with wax also. Am I describing it correctly? I never heard of that custom. Or when a person died, you would take wicks, the wicks you make candles out of, and stretch it out along the perimeter of the grave, and then use those wicks to make the special Havdalah candles that they use on Saturday night, the special braided candles. I mean, amazing things that our people did, that I didn't know about, that lost. And it was, for me, a revival. And a chance, when I teach, to tell my students these things, because they're precious, they're wonderful things that have gone away from the modern world.
Earlier you mentioned translating the novella, you got back to the purity of the word of the Yiddish. Can you tell me how that made you feel?
Well, it just didn't make me, I don't know if it made me feel as much, it made me just aware that of nuances, of words that I was maybe misusing or that I should include in my vocabulary and make better use of, most American Yiddish speakers will say, ich gleich das. Now, in English, the word like has two meanings. This is just like this, and I like you. Different meanings. American Jews took the comparative word like, and made it the word for affection. So let's say, gleich means straight or just like. Okay, das ist gleich wie das. This is exactly like this. They say, ich gleich dir. It means I'm exactly like you. What does it mean? But it's American Yiddish. It's a corruption, and so I was aware. Doing this work sort of brought me back to what I should be saying. There are better ways. Es gefällt mir. Ich hab es lieb. Ich hab es hold. There are words to use in Yiddish, but not gleich. And so it just. But that's true of everything I've done in Yiddish. All my studies in Vilna also did that for me. Purified it somehow.
So you're currently running the Yiddish Circle at the Weissman Community Center
Yes.
in Delray Beach, Florida.
Yes, that's the second one I've run. I did one in Hollywood for 15 years.
Can you tell me more about that?
Oh, it's wonderful. It started with 6 people. Now, 2 weeks ago, we had 62 people. The first and third Fridays, we meet 10 o'clock on Friday mornings for 2 hours. And the first and third Friday, we read literature. The second Friday, we see a Yiddish film, a classic. And the third Friday, we have a Schmueskreis where they do all the work. They talk, they prepare recipes, jokes, stories, anything they want to. So we have a variety. And some people who don't know Yiddish just come, because we translate the Yiddish into English when necessary. So we have people who just come to hear the translation. But it's a wonderful group of people. They're survivors, they're young people, there's all different ages. And they love it, and they become very strong friends over the last 4.5 years. Real good friendships have emerged. And I have great respect for them. And my Yiddish is not the best. I shouldn't be teaching. But no, I needed a Yiddish group, because I need to have Yiddish in my life. By creating this, 30 years ago, I could have walked down the street and heard 2 ladies talking Yiddish. They're gone. They're not walking, they're dead. They're gone. To hear Yiddish, I need to find, through a Yiddish club, people who also like Yiddish. So I found these wonderful brothers and sisters,
Have you ever met anyone with the same Yiddish accent as yours?
Litvak, sure. Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, my grandchildren. I have 7 grandchildren, and 6 of them are very, very Orthodox. One is not, because his father. My son has 1 child in Vancouver, and they're just living a normal North American life. My daughter had 6 children, and she was very, very frum, and she raised 5 boys and a girl who are very, very frum. Payas, the whole thing, black hats, and they live. Most of them. One is in Israel, one is here, and 4 of them are in Lakewood, New Jersey, and they all go to Litvish yeshivas, so they speak Yiddish, and they have the Litvish accent, which is our accent. So I'm delighted by that, to hear them speaking. And we speak Yiddish when they call me on the phone. They speak to me in Yiddish. It's wonderful.
How does it make you feel to have grandchildren who speak Yiddish?
I love it, because nobody else has that. I mean, American kids don't speak Yiddish, but I lucked out, and so it's wonderful. I gloat over it. It's really wonderful. And I know my mother would be happy also. My grandmother, they would all be happy to think that this is continuing.
What has been most important for you to transmit to the generations after you about Yiddish or about Jewish identity?
I don't know if I can answer that. I don't know. Something you feel, and I can't transmit it. Because I know nobody transmitted it to me. I picked it up from my environment. It was rich, and it came at me, and I grabbed it. But nobody said, you got to do this, you got to do that. I never heard that. So I can't do that to anybody else. Either they find it or they don't. It's their problem. I can't. I have no words of wisdom, except for, I think I tell my grandchildren whenever I do something for them that's kind, and they said, "Oh, how can we repay you?" I said, "You don't. You pay it down. You do whatever I've done is good. You do to the next generation." That I do believe. That you give. You don't pay back to the person who's doing it. You pay it forward. I don't really have other than that a philosophy to impart.
How, if at all, has Yiddish played a role in your role as a father or a grandfather?
I don't know. I know that we spoke Yiddish at home, but my children didn't understand it. They understand. My daughter and son, when they hear it, they understand it quite well, but they can't speak it, and they don't love it. They just, it was, because my wife grew up in a Yiddish-speaking home as I did, and so we used Yiddish a lot in the house. I remember once we were visiting my mother in Brooklyn. We were in Brighton Beach, and whenever we were in Vancouver, we would speak Yiddish, because she was walking down the street in Brighton Beach, and she's telling me something about a lady, and she said, "You can't speak Yiddish here. They understand it, But so we had a lot of Yiddish, but my daughter understands a lot, but her children, I don't know if I've answered your question.
Did you ever teach your children Yiddish?
Once, I remember one day sitting with my daughter, she asked about it, but no, never. She learned Hebrew, and so did my son. They went to Talmud Torah, the Hebrew day school in Vancouver, and they learned Hebrew. And then they both went to Israel at different times and learned Hebrew also. But no, never, not Yiddish, never worked out that way, no.
You mentioned earlier about being proactive and grabbing onto and grabbing onto that when you were a child and growing up.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate more on that? What you mean by being strong?
No, it just means that well, I guess I can. My mother spoke Yiddish. My bubby spoke Yiddish. The neighbor spoke Yiddish. We had Jewish music in the house, Jewish radio in the house. We ate Jewish food. We celebrated Jewish holidays. We followed the Jewish laws. It just was, and if you didn't, my sister never liked it. She felt she didn't want to be foreign, and so she rejected it. Her Yiddish is not. She understands it. She can't speak it ever, and she never learned to read or write it. And so you have to grab hold of it. It was there, but she didn't take hold of it. She wanted something else, America. And that's her choice, you know. She now envies me a little bit because she knows how steeped I am in Yiddishkeit, and she didn't take advantage of it, but I took advantage of it. Nobody said to me, do it. I just loved it. I loved my bubby, that was what it was. And my bubby was you know, all Yiddish. And I love my mother too. So it was something you do, something you have in your soul that yearns for something, makes a click.
Do you see that as something that's passed down or just something of one's activeness?
Well, I know that my grandchildren are all very proud of the fact that they've learned Yiddish. They didn't, again, it was thrown at them. They went to yeshiva, and in yeshiva, when you're learning the Talmud, which is written in Aramaic, you translate, it's called Ibn, you translate from Aramaic to Yiddish. And they were forced to do it. They never had lessons in Yiddish. They just did, and they learned Yiddish. And they know how much it pleases me. So they're pleased, they're happy to please me. They feel a connection with it. But again, they didn't. It was inflicted upon them in a way. It wasn't a punishment, but you know, if they hadn't been there, they never would have chosen Yiddish. But they have, and they're happy as a result that they're closer to my love of it, you know. And I'm thrilled. Yeah.
To what extent do you think language plays a role in transmission between generations?
I think it means everything. It means everything. Because each language has its own way of expressing itself. And Yiddish has its own way of endearment, of being sarcastic, of being angry. And it's different than English, and it's different than French, and it's different than any other language. You know, and I think that I inherited that because my mother could be very sarcastic if she wanted to, and I could pick it up, you know. And another person would say, she said nothing. I said, oh, she said a lot, you know. But it's I think every language, if you go to a Spanish home, they have things that they do that are uniquely theirs that they understand, you know. But
could you give any examples that you just mentioned?
Yeah, the sarcasm. Let me think. No, I can't think of anything right off the bat. But I wish I could. I can't think of anything. I'm sorry.
How, if at all, do you see Yiddish as a bridge between older and younger generations?
I think what's happening is the older generation doesn't know Yiddish, and there's a new generation coming along of people, you know, at the Yiddish Book Center and places like that who do know Yiddish. So I think that it's, you know, Bubby Stephanie is going to have an aliyah with her granddaughter Yocheved. You know, that Bubby's name, you know, there's a whole generation, my generation of Americanized Jews who threw away Yiddish. And their grandchildren are now, if not Yiddish, then Hebrew, are coming back to having Jewish names and Jewish culture. And so it's a complete reversal. It's not the old people who carry the culture, it's the young people who are rediscovering. Some are discovering Yiddish. Most of them, of course, are discovering the Hebrew part of Judaism. But I don't think that... with few exceptions, most American Jews really don't care about Yiddish. They look down at it. I met Jews who don't even call it Yiddish, they call it jargon, you know, which is an insult. They say, why are you studying a jargon, you know? Oh, it's a bastard language. I said, no, it's got so many foreign words. So does English. They're called fusion languages. They borrow beautifully. That's what makes them so rich, you know? Oh.
As a native Yiddish speaker, what do you think about that reversal you just mentioned about the older generation throwing it away and the younger coming back?
I don't think there are enough younger people. Too many young people are following their grandparents' footsteps and becoming Americanized and throwing it away and think there's nothing to it. But there are some, you know, in the frum world, of course, it's very prevalent. In the secular world, too, there are many secular people, non-Jews and Jews who are learning Yiddish. That's wonderful. But to learn, we know when a language is taught in university, Latin is taught in university, it's a dead language. It's when a man and woman make love in Yiddish, when two kids fight in Yiddish, when a mother scolds a child in Yiddish, that's when it's living. And the people who are learning Yiddish in college are not going to be doing that. They're going to academically know how to speak Yiddish. But I don't know, except for the Frum Jews, if anybody's really making love in Yiddish, or fighting in Yiddish, or going shopping in Yiddish. That makes the language alive. And that's not happening so fast. It's not dying, but it's having a hard time.
What does Yiddish mean to you today?
I think I've been saying it all along. It's my essence. It's my essence, It's what I love,
Do you think there's a Yiddish revival?
Yes and no. I think that among the Orthodox Jews it's not a revival, except that now Yiddish has become the new holy tongue. For Orthodox Jews, Yiddish was the everyday language which they used to avoid speaking the holy tongue. On the Shabbos, when they studied or when they wrote, they would use Hebrew. Hebrew has become the language of Israel. The secret language among Orthodox Jews today is Yiddish. It's the secret language of Orthodoxy, so it's become the holy tongue in a way. And if you want to hear it, you have to go into a Mea Sharim or Crown Heights in New York or Lakewood, New Jersey, to hear Yiddish spoken by young kids on the street as they're playing. So I don't know if that's a revival. That's a continuum. The fact that you or other people your generation are learning Yiddish, it's not a revival, because you're learning it academically, but you're not going to make love in it, and you're not going to have a fight with your wife in it either, and that's what's happening to it.
What do you see as the future of Yiddish?
I don't know. I can quote Basheva Singer, who said for 1,000 years people are saying Yiddish has been a dead language, and it's still here, kind of thing. I'm misquoting him, but I have no idea. I don't think that it's going to have the millions of people speaking it that spoke it before the Holocaust, but there'll be hundreds of thousands who speak it. And of course, remember, the birth rate among ultra-Orthodox Jews is tremendous, 10, 11 children, and they speak Yiddish. So, and also, if you look at the biography of most Yiddish writers, most Yiddish intellectuals in the 19th, early 20th century, they came from a Yiddish-speaking home, came from yeshiva, and ran away. Well, maybe in the future there's a trend that Orthodox Jews will also have some offshoots who will run away and still use Yiddish. There's a little bit of that. One meets in different schools, people from a Hasidic background who have left religion but hold on to the Yiddish. Have you met any of those people? Yeah. So now, whether that's enough to be a revival, I don't think so. But it is it's sort of an interesting sort of outgrowth of what's happening in the Yiddish world. Can't tell the future. I don't know. I'm not good at it.
So you've dedicated a lot of your life to Yiddish and teaching and that sort of work. Yeah. How do you see your own self and work in terms of this broader conversation about Yiddish and the future of Yiddish?
Say that again. I'm not sure I understand the question.
How do you see your own self and your own life in terms of the broader picture of Yiddish today?
I don't. I'm teaching Yiddish mostly to older people. They're going to go like I go. Their children are not going to learn Yiddish. I'm not teaching it to young housewives, and I'm not teaching anybody who's going to take it home. So I'm holding on to it. I'm holding on because I love it. So I hold on to it, and I'm satisfied to have my club and have once a week to hear Yiddish and read Yiddish. But I don't think I'm having an impact on the future. Maybe some university professors are, but I'm speaking to an older crowd, really, of people who spoke Yiddish like I did and who have the same nostalgic feelings. They're comrades. But I don't see a future. But I live in the present, so what do I care about the future? Somebody else worry about the future.
So we're nearing the end of our time, but I'd like to ask if there are any other topics you'd like to touch on?
No, I think we've more or less exhausted it. I can't think of anything we've talked about that no, I don't think so. No, you've done a good job.
I'd like to ask if you have a favorite Yiddish word, phrase, or song you would like to share with us.
Oh, gosh, I wish you told me this in advance. I would have thought of something. I'm sure I do, but I don't think about it when I get in the car. I can't think of anything right now off the top of my head. And I can't think of anything. I'm sure there are, but I can't think of something. I'm sorry.
No worries. No. What advice do you have for future generations?
I think I told you before, I don't. I have none. Mm-hmm. I have none. My mother gave me advice once. It's a bit coarse because my mother liked coarse words. And am I allowed to say be coarse? Mm-hmm. And I remember coming to her once. I was living in Vancouver. I came to New York to see her, and I asked her an advice. And she says, "Listen, baby," she says, "Neither." She says, "Listen, I fucked up my life. Fuck up your own." and, and so that's my advice to my children also. I said, don't come to me for advice. We all screw up our life in our own way. It's your time to screw up your own life. I'm not giving you advice. So I have no advice for future generations. I don't know if you can erase it if you can't have it. But that's what she told me. It was wonderful. It's good advice.
Well, thank you for
Okay,
speaking with me today. It's been a pleasure to interview you.
Okay.
And on behalf of the Yiddish Book Center and the Oral History Project, I want to say thank you again.
Thank you for having me.